Hello, and welcome to Old Toy, New Joy, the show where I share with you my previously enjoyed toys I purchased from online sources, thrift stores, and collector shows that once belonged to someone else. Today's episode is Collecting and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I have mentioned before on Old Toy, New Joy that one of my favorite movies to watch over and over again is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino film that centers around the grisly Manson murders in 1969 and focuses on both real and fictional characters. Since first watching this movie, I became fascinated with the many little things and details that Tarantino injected into many of the scenes to help create a real feeling of nostalgia. As a collector, I began noticing the toys, posters, comics, and other memorabilia, as well as the numerous references to 50s and 60s pop culture. And so today, I will feature several collectible items I have purchased before and since becoming a fan of the movie that either remind me of the movie or are directly related to the movie itself. The main story is of TV cowboy Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who lives in the Hollywood Hills. In his house are several cool collectible items. I have some of these items as well as others resembling those items. These are 4 Hopalong Cassidy milk mugs made by Hazel Atlas in the 1950s. I picked these up at a collector's show just a few weeks ago. And at the beginning of the movie, Rick has 3. And by the end of the movie, he has added the 4th. And there are 4 in the set. Played by William Boyd on television, Hopalong Cassidy was a popular TV show that actually began as a radio show in the 1930s, not unlike The Lone Ranger. And here are my 1979 Gabriel 3 3/4 Lone Ranger action figures with horses. I have the Lone Ranger, Tonto, Bill Cavendish. I still need General Custer, but I do have Buffalo Bill. And speaking of Buffalo Bill, here is an antique copy of Heroes of the Plains, or Life and Wonderful Adventures of Wild Bill, Buffalo Bill, and Exploits of General Custer, Kit Carson, California Joe, Captain Jack, Captain D.L. Payne, and White Beaver. And this was published in 1886. And yes, I picked this up at a thrift store just for a few bucks. And on his wall is a framed Mad magazine with a cover parodying his role as Jake Cahill in the fictitious Western TV show Bounty Law. Not dissimilar to this cracked magazine parodying Rocky from 1977. Bounty Law was apparently a late 1950s and early 1960s TV show, not unlike Bonanza, which is referenced in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Rick Dalton's fictional stuntman is a cool, tough guy named Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. Cliff is so cool he lives in a trailer home next to a drive-in movie theater. Cliff has lots of interesting things in his trailer, including this 1967 Marx Geronimo figure, which was sitting just like this on a shelf in Cliff's trailer. It took me a while to figure out what it was because I wasn't familiar with the 1960s and early 70s Marx figures. But I soon fell in love with them, and I also got this horse and this Apache Chief. In his trailer, Cliff also has some Western-themed comic books from the 1960s, including a Kid Colt, not unlike this one, from 1967. We also have Cheyenne Kid, Rawhide Kid, Outlaw Kid, and Two Gun Kid. Here's a cool Bonanza book, Treachery Trail, published in 1968. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does reference Bonanza. And not too long ago, I picked up from a thrift store this Wild West Deluxe 6-shooter set with Sheriff, and it looks like a Lone Ranger mask from 1998. I had something just like this in the late 70s as a little kid, and I know kids had things like this in the 1950s as well, so just wanted to throw it in there with this great Western theme we've got going. And there's a great scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when Margot Robbie's character goes to the movies, and she sees a lobby card in the entrance of the theater of a movie she was in. It's Matt Helm and the Wrecking Crew, starring Dean Martin. Here is a similarly sized lobby card of Dirty Harry Magnum Force, starring Clint Eastwood and Felton Perry. And I don't know, well, I do know, lobby cards aren't a thing anymore, but they used to be, and they were this size, and there was usually anywhere from 4 to 10 for the same movie. And I picked this up for a couple bucks at a thrift store a few years ago. This is my favorite Dirty Harry movie, and it's from 1973. And another great reason to mention Clint Eastwood when you're talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that in real life, Clint Eastwood starred in the first great spaghetti western movies of the mid-1960s. Tarantino has his main character, Rick Dalton, transition from TV cowboy to spaghetti western movie star, hoping that he will have the same success as Clint. Margot Robbie then goes into the theater to watch Matt Helm and the Wrecking Crew, but first sees a trailer for CeCe and Company, starring 1969 NFL Super Bowl MVP Joe Namath. This was one of a few anachronisms in Tarantino's movie because CeCe and Company was actually released over a year and a half after when this scene actually is supposed to take place, which is in early 1969. This is a 1971 Topps Game Inserts Joe Namath. In another scene in the movie, Margot Robbie is listening to a record of Paul Revere and the Raiders' Good Thing. I love vinyl. I have a record player, and I do collect when I can, so I was happy to find this 45 of Good Thing by Paul Revere and the Raiders. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood also makes reference to James Bond. Here is a vintage VHS tape of my favorite James Bond movie, 1973's Live and Let Die, which not only features Roger Moore, but also actor Yaphet Koto as the villain. When in his trailer home, we see Cliff Booth watching an episode of Mannix, in which Yaphet Koto plays a jazz musician on the run. Yaphet was also in an episode of Bonanza. Coincidence? So, thank you so much for tuning in today to Old Toy New Joy and allowing me to share my collectibles that remind me of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you liked the video, please like the video, and we will keep them coming. In the meantime, I encourage you to subscribe to Old Toy New Joy so that you can get caught up and also get notifications of the 130 plus episodes we have featuring such things as wrestling figures, Masters of the Universe, Redline Hot Wheels, 80s Hot Wheels, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, Star Trek, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Thundercats, Superpowers, Pogs, Smurfs, hockey cards, baseball cards, and much, much more. Until next time, this is your Toy Whisperer saying farewell and happy hunting from Old Toy New Joy.